Welcome to Slow Night Ancient Tales, your peaceful sanctuary at the end of the day. Tonight, as the world outside grows quiet and still, we will travel to a chilly autumn evening in 1930s Korea with Lee Hyo-seok's story, The Afternoon's Rhythm. This is a tale of a young man wandering in the deep shadows of life who finds an unexpected spark of hope and purpose under the cold moonlight. Take a deep breath, let go of the heavy thoughts of the day, and let your body sink into your bed. Close your eyes and let the rhythmic clack of an old printing press and the faint scent of crisp autumn air guide you into a deep, restful slumber. The Afternoon's Rhythm. Author, Lee Hyo-seok. It was slightly past noon when he opened the door to the printing shop, carefully observing the atmosphere inside the office. His mind and body trembled uncontrollably. It was because of the anxiety stemming from the danger of the task he was planning, and also the chill he felt from the unexpectedly cold weather. Since it was not even halfway through November, it shouldn't have been that bitter. But after a late bout of rain scattered down, the weather had suddenly turned chilly a few days ago. Falling into a fitful shrimp-like sleep after collapsing from working late with his comrades among the family in the cramped Ondal room of the M8 shop the night before probably made him shiver even more. But more than that, it was the sheer weight of the task overwhelming his mind that made him physically tremble. Just a few days after the incident had exploded, the watertight surveillance network was truly formidable. Every passing man on the street seemed to be targeting him, and countless eyes seemed to be hiding in every corner of the streets, watching his every move. How many times had he looked around wildly when finding the printing shop and entering the back alley, and how much had he peered around the printing shop's courtyard? He had visited this place once before, brought by Mr. Choi from the typesetting department, but because the owner commuted to his company every day, the owner's wife was guarding the office alone. There were 3 printing presses and nearly 20 workers. The reason he sought out this rather large-scale printing shop was, firstly, because he had a firm promise with Choi in typesetting, and secondly, to take advantage of this printing shop's unguarded moments. I need to print 5,000 leaflets for a new book advertisement. Can it be done today? Are you from the magazine company? A plump, good-natured-looking woman with slightly protruding teeth welcomed him gladly. Our hands happen to be free right now, so it can certainly be done. She offered a chair to this guest from the magazine company. Of course, he already knew their hands were free because he had heard it from Choi. Just one window separated them from the factory floor. Since it was lunchtime, the sound of the machines had stopped, and workers coming and going with water kettles could be seen through the window. Among them, the shadow of Choi also flickered. It will probably need to be done with stencil paper. He handed over several pages of manuscript to her without hesitation. Because it was all in Korean with only a few Chinese characters mixed in, there was, of course, no way she would understand its contents. Then we will begin immediately. The woman took the manuscript and went into the factory. It was only a few minutes later that the sound of the machines rang out and the work began. Naturally, as they had planned, the manuscript was passed to Choi, who took charge of both picking the type and setting it. Pay close attention so we get it right on the first plate, without needing multiple revisions. He made this request while standing in front of the type case, holding a box, talking to Choi, who was completely absorbed in picking out the letters, and then he left the factory. The landlady was making chopping noises in the kitchen, and the office was empty. Sitting alone with the brazier, he looked out the window, thinking of his comrades who would be busy pushing rollers in the dimly lit mimeograph room at this very moment. The afternoon in the back alley was quiet. On the second floor of the brick house belonging to a Chinese prostitute, the bobbed-haired Chinese woman was leaning against the window, enjoying the autumn sunlight. The dangling gold earrings beneath her bobbed hair sparkled in the light. She looked out the window for quite a while, then stood up, closed the window, and pulled down the curtain. As he absently watched this meaningless back alley scenery, Choi's voice came from behind him. Check the proofs quickly. In his hands was a thickly inked first proof, his skilled technique taking less than an hour and a half for picking and setting the type, was something to marvel at. There probably won't be any typos. Just as Choi confidently predicted, finding not a single typo while reading through it was a delightful thing indeed. The two immediately went into the factory and took the tightly locked form to the press department. There were 3 machines, a 16-page roller, an 8-page roller, and a 4-page roller, lined up in order, but they ended up using the 8-page roller in the middle. "Please do it a bit quickly," Choi asked the press operator openly. However, this probably didn't sound very suspicious to the ignorant worker. Once the form was tightly secured, fresh ink poured, and the stop lever thrown, the machine began to turn. The rotation of the 6 rollers was smooth, and a simple rhythm rang out lightly. The palm-like grippers caught and turned over the printed leaflets wrapping around the cylinder's body one by one. Just as he was standing next to the machine, feeling excited and taking pleasure in the smell of fresh ink and the tactile sensation of 3-dimensional type, "Guest, you have a phone call." The landlady opened the office door and called him out. He left the factory and picked up the desk phone in the office with a slight sense of unease. "Who is it?" "It's me, Naru." "Ah, Naru, what is it?" He was both relieved and pleased that the call was from Naru at the bookstore. It had been a long time since he started frequently visiting the MH bookstore. Rather than just having a special affection for Mr. Kim's situation, running this small-scale bookstore amidst poverty and tears, raising Naru and her sibling while her husband was taken away to prison for years, it was because there was a natural convergence of emotions between this revolutionary's family and himself. Among these family members, he had been growing especially close to Naru. "Didn't you forget something?" "Forget something?" "Yes, you left something at the bookstore. I don't know what it could be. Your wallet." Ah, only then did he pat his pocket and discover his carelessness in leaving his wallet behind. Inside the wallet was the money for the printing costs. Last night, while working late at the MH bookstore, he had entrusted the wallet to Naru when eating a simple midnight snack. His relationship with the bookstore's family was so close and unreserved that he could even entrust them with his wallet. When he left the bookstore in the morning, his exhausted mind had completely forgotten about it. "I'll bring it over right now. Please come quickly." Hanging up the phone, he went back into the factory. The person feeding the paper, the person receiving the printed sheets, their hands moved in perfect synchronization with the refreshing rhythm of the machine. Beside the rhythmically rising and falling gripper, the leaflets had already piled up to quite a thick volume. The thick number 1 and special size type, fresh with the smell of ink at the top, and the number 4 type filling the entire surface of the stencil paper beautifully overwhelmed his vision, and every phrase of the brilliant writing struck his heart. This one thrilling word, this one phrase will pierce the hearts of countless youths. His eyes suddenly grew hot. Thinking of the explosive effect of this thrilling writing drafted with red blood, a sudden surge of emotion made his chest and eyes burn. Since it was an 8-page roller, the printing would be finished in an hour. He would wrap it in a cloth bundle, divide it with Naru, evade the eyes of the street, go to the bookstore, wait for nightfall, and then split the task with his comrades to distribute them all at once on telephone poles, fences, brick walls, every corner of the STI. And a portion would be mailed out, along with the ones mimeographed by his comrades, to key cities and various organizations. When the day passed, the red passion and shouts would rise simultaneously from every street, shaking the earth. "Mr. Hanmin!" His thoughts were interrupted by the lovely voice of Naru running open the factory door, and only the clack-clack of the softly turning rollers, the delightful tune of the machine, echoed beautifully and profoundly inside the afternoon printing shop. Here lies a prelude. Even if I call myself a Marxist, it wouldn't be much of a slip of the tongue, and there is no law saying one cannot call themselves a Marxist. Muttering this, the old, soot-blackened rattan chair creaked as he twisted his body. Above the messy, tangled beard, his lusterless, unfocused gaze was thrown onto the opposite wall. Though lacking luster, his 2 eyes took on a bizarre gleam like an owl's in the dim room. Truly dim indeed. "Do not do it" was a pronoun for "do not die." The pitiful Marxist Juwa had been shut in his dark room for 2 days and nights, immersed in thoughts of death. It had been a long time since he thought of suicide, but for the past few days it had possessed a powerful charm and completely occupied his mind. He genuinely plotted his suicide. First, he struggled to rationalize the justification of his suicide. Then he sought out the method, and finally he painted various scenes of his suicide in his head. The rationalization of suicide, the negation of life, and the affirmation of death. This was the greatest obstacle. He pondered the meaning and purpose of the accumulation of human culture, which no one had clearly illuminated, even though many had unconditionally affirmed it. Scholars have proven that the animals occupying this earth before humans were reptiles, and before them, mammoths. Given this history, humanity cannot occupy the earth forever. Hasn't some scholar already predicted that the higher animal to come after humans will be the kangaroo? Will human culture still be valid in the world of kangaroos? The brilliant tower of human culture, accumulated layer upon layer, will be torn down without a trace. When that time comes, where will one go to find the meaning and destination of human culture? The tower of culture, it is nothing more than a momentary splendid mirage. Dancing and struggling around that mirage, is that not already a sorrowful effort and a melancholy truth? Thus Juwa thought. It is a fact that all 10,000 things in the world change dialectically. Therefore, the state after a revolution will certainly not be a completely flawless final state. Even in that seemingly spotless state, contradictions will have already been conceived unnoticed, growing gradually to bring about the next revolution. Ultimately, it will change and change, knowing no end, so humanity can never hope for a finally stabilized absolute state. Is this not also a frustrating truth? And humans, who ceaselessly seek unity everywhere, will simply exhaust themselves in vain efforts amid this unending change. The root that controls all movements and revolutions of humanity is food and sex. The sight of people jumping around unsightly, driven by these simple animalistic impulses, is this not also melancholy? Thus Juwa also thought. Since the meaning of revolution in culture is already such, what need is there to suppress the agony, grit one's teeth, and do one's utmost as a builder? People cannot even clarify that, yet they blindly advocate life for life's sake and cry out for courage's sake. It is laughable. Why must humans live, to build a grand and holy culture? Why build a culture? There is no answer and no explanation here. In short, the problem is a matter of taste, a matter of interest. Humans live because they have a taste for life. Therefore, when they lose their taste for life, they die. That is, both life and death are ultimately teeters of taste. Whether one takes an interest in life or an interest in death, it is an equally free right for anyone. There is absolutely no right or qualification to criticize a person who dies while maintaining an interest in life. If one criticizes the path of suicide as the path of defeat from the perspective of the suicide victim, the pitiful sight of those who cannot even die but drag themselves along trying to live could be criticized as the very embodiment of defeat itself. If suicide is an escape from life, is life not an escape from death? Anyway, when one loses interest in life, taking the path of death, which is opposed to life but on an equal footing, is perfectly justifiable. He transcends the foolish criticism of third parties and stands tall. Marxism and suicide. Marxism is an issue that comes after life, or, just as life is a pre-Marxist issue, death is also a pre-Marxist issue. A Marxist's suicide, it is by no means a laughable phenomenon. Pitying those who mock him, the face of the suicided Marxist will bear a pale smile. Thinking, repeating, and revising his thoughts through the nights and days, over 2 days, Juwa finally reached the conclusion he had sought to obtain, exactly as he had planned from the start. As a Marxist, he wandered far, far away from the stance and category of Marxism, in a realm that might damage the name of Marxist even if it couldn't honor it, and twisted and fabricated things until he got the conclusion he demanded. However, no matter how bent and warped his theories and conclusions were, drawn from this cocktail and hodgepodge of skepticism, romanticism, sophism, and nihilism, his mind now found a kind of stability. Whether his dizzy mind and chaotic emotions were warped or not, it was because he had handed down a final unification. Or perhaps it was because he was drunk on the aroma of that unique cocktail. will absolutely die. Anyway, when he muttered this conclusion for the final time, a tragic and composed expression of having closed a chapter appeared on Juwa's pale face. Making his final decision and rising from the rattan chair, Juwa couldn't help but be freshly startled by his own emaciated appearance reflected in the mirror placed above the bookshelf. His cheeks gaunt as if carved away, his lusterless eyes. He felt disgusted with himself. Having wasted away like this, it is indeed fitting to die, he thought. The portrait of Marx pasted on the wall looked down at him heavily, perhaps out of pity. Out of dignity, Juwa could not bring himself to look Marx squarely in the eye. Did Marx ever experience such destitution in both mind and material as I am now? When he thought this, however, Juwa suddenly felt a surge of antagonism. Toward Marx, his ancestor, his teacher, and his comrade, he suddenly felt an antagonism he had never felt before. His hand, trembling with nerves, was already tearing at the portrait on the wall without him realizing it. In the next moment, Marx's beard was pitifully ripped to shreds by the hands of a disciple. Even if I can't bow in farewell to this good-natured uncle on my final dying day, did I really need to humiliate him so cruelly? As the torn pieces of the portrait fluttered down to the messy floor, Joa couldn't help but feel a handful of regret. He had to reproach his sudden nervous outburst and rash behavior, wondering if being this hysterical was ultimately the result of starving for the past few days. Tears suddenly welled up at his own pitiful plight. Squeezing his eyes shut to let the tears fall, he pulled out a couple of the most valuable original copies of Das Kapital from his impoverished bookshelf. The nourishment for his mind that had guided and cultivated him since his university days was now turning into the price for the medicine of his suicide. Wearing his single high-collared uniform, a relic from his school days, and clutching the books, Yuwa ran out of the dark room. Having exchanged the Marx he had worshipped for so long for a few thin banknotes without leaving any lingering attachment, Juwa went to his regular pharmacy, feigned insomnia, and got his hands on a box of the hard-to-obtain Alonil. Calmorin, rat poison, heroin, potassium cyanide, strychnine, Alonil. Out of all these numerous drugs he had jokingly asked a friend at the hospital about in his spare time, he chose Alonil. 1 and 25 John for a small box that didn't even fill a handful was certainly an excessive price, but when he considered that it was the final compensation that would bring eternal comfort, he left the pharmacy without a word, leaving behind a pale smile. The falling autumn evening pressed in chilly. To him, who hadn't been out on the streets in a long time, the autumn felt overly fresh. In the clear sky, a waning moon shone coldly. Because it was the moon that looked down upon this bustling street today, and would also look down upon this street when it became a ruin tomorrow, he felt its face was terribly cold. Intending to take one last lap around the fresh night streets before returning to his dark room to bid farewell to the world, he aimlessly stepped into the busy downtown. The cruel or flashy living conditions of foolish humans shone sorrowfully in every corner. There was nothing there but the continuation of monotonous habits and the repetition of mundane philosophy. Whether bourgeoisie or proletariat, the sight of them taking interest in that sand-like mediocrity seemed infinitely foolish to him. Lightly dressed girls flowed through the streets, bathed in the chaotic reflection of brilliant illuminations, and inside the brightly lit department stores, living goods and foodstuffs of various designs were gorgeously displayed. But not a single thing attracted him. Radios and records sang cheerfully, but his heart did not dance. "Is there anything I want to eat before I die?" He looked around, but his heart firmly answered, no. Even the conversation of a beautiful couple pressing their faces close to a display window, picking out winter coat fabrics, could not tempt him. There is not a single lingering attachment on this street. Ultimately concluding this, he turned back halfway up the street he had been ascending. My twisted heart may indeed be deeply rooted in a dressed-up stubbornness, but at least my current emotions are right, Joa muttered inwardly. Leaving the busy streets, passing through the wide roads, and slipping through the narrow alleys again, he reached the Jongdong Ridge he used to love daily on his way home, looking at it one last time. In the end, I will have to befriend that cold moon. Crossing the silent ridge, devoid of human presence and where the sounds of the street could be heard faintly in the distance, he looked up at the moon again. Perhaps intoxicated by the cold, clear, and high spirit of the moon, his heart possessed the clear mind and serene state of a traveler right before departing for the land of death. Suddenly, something brushed past his ears. It was definitely the sound of running footsteps. When he absent-mindedly turned around, there was a moving body running up the ridge from afar. A simple color scheme, white on the upper half, black on the lower, was frantically swimming up through the dim moonlight. Jua stopped dead in his tracks and observed the movements of this unexpected figure. The color that swam breathlessly up the ridge rushed right up to Jua and stopped. It was a lightly built young girl, barely over 20. In one arm, she carried a thick bundle of paper. "What are you?" At this sudden question from a strange girl, Juwa's heart grew confused. What do you mean? Aren't you a detective? A detective? No, I am not." In that moment, the posture of the girl, whose tension seemed to ease slightly, was exceptionally beautiful. Her prominent, sharp nose and large, bold eyes vibrated in the moonlight like a high fragrance. As if facing something holy, Juwa's heart shone hazily. "There is someone chasing me from behind, so if you meet them, please just tell them I went straight down this ridge. And I'm sorry, but please scatter these leaflets messily around here." The girl spoke swiftly, handed the bundle of leaflets to Juwa's hands, and hurriedly hid herself in a secluded spot by the corner of a long wall beside the road. Mesmerized by the radiance of the beautiful girl, Juwa's mind was thrown into confusion again by her incomprehensible commands and actions. However, vaguely realizing there was danger to her safety, he messily scattered the leaflets there according to her instruction and looked down the ridge she had run up. He saw two dark shadows swiftly leaping up the slope. Feigning ignorance, Juwa turned around and calmly walked down his path. Before he could take more than a few steps, he was caught by the two men who had leaped over the ridge. "Didn't you see a woman running this way?" One of the men, who had a bad impression, asked urgently. "She went straight down this road." "What are these leaflets?" "I picked them up because that woman threw them." "You shouldn't pick up things like this." The man roughly snatched the leaflets from Juwa's hand, and painstakingly picking up every single scattered leaflet one by one, he swiftly ran down the hill to find where the girl had gone. However, the remaining man did not follow his colleague but stayed there, glaring sharply at Juwa. "I'm from the police station. What do you do?" It wasn't that he hadn't guessed this would happen, but being confronted so directly made Juwa feel unwell and anxious. "I don't do much of anything." "You mean you're unemployed? What are you planning to do in the future?" "In the future, I am in the middle of trying to die." "Die?" Thinking Juwa's answer was a joke meant to insult him, the detective glared at him as if he were insolent. "What do you have on you?" "Nothing." The detective freely searched through Juwa's pockets with his own hands. From the upper pocket came a few business cards that scattered onto the street, and from the lower pocket came only the box of Alonol. "What is this?" "Sleeping medicine." As if realizing something, the detective held the Alonol box up to the moonlight and continued his questioning. "What is your relationship with that woman from earlier?" "Relationship? I don't know her." "Is that true?" "It is not a lie." "Where did that woman go?" "She went straight down this road." "Is that true?" "It is not a lie." Answering with feigned ignorance, exactly as he had done earlier, showed no signs of unnaturalness to the detective. However, he slowly and carefully looked Juwa up and down for a while before finally proposing, "I have more to ask you, so you have to come down to the station with me for a bit." It was a proposal he didn't care much about. "If you have something to ask, please ask it all here. Just come with me for a bit." He grabbed Juwa's hand. "What business does a dying man have going to the police station?" He shook off the hand, but the detective firmly grabbed and pulled his hand again. Experiencing this sudden incident on this final ridge, having come out to see the streets before committing suicide, felt to Juhua like nothing more than a deeply bitter comedy. Being dragged off together wasn't something he feared, but an impulse wanting to know more about the girl's circumstances made him curious about what was behind him. He blamed his own carelessness for not even having read the contents of the leaflets the girl handed him earlier in the rush. As he was dragged down the ridge by the detective, Juhwa twisted his body slightly to throw fleeting glances back toward the wall corner where the girl would be hiding. The beautiful girl's posture, the bold, large eyes, the sharp nose, flowed into his heart like a high fragrance. And his heart, which had felt no lingering attachment to anything on this street or in this world, a long, reverberating echo of attachment to that shining girl he had surely seen for the first time, was now vibrating. Whether it was through no fault of his own, or due to the utterly unexpected, coincidental interaction with the beautiful maiden, Juhwa, who had finished an unjust 3 days of detention, left Station C late on the afternoon of the 4th day. Of course, despite 3 days of interrogation, nothing came out of him, and suffering for 3 days over vague suspicions was extremely unfair to him. However, he did not find this unfair first experience particularly angering, for it was the beautiful maiden who had guided him to this first experience, and her figure had begun shining in Juhwa's heart from the first moment he met her. The maiden's sharp nose and large, bold eyes flowed like a high fragrance through his heart during those dark 3 days, brightly illuminating his hellishly dark mind. Truly, because of that sudden lamp that appeared before him, he recovered the lingering attachment to life he had once lost, and the terrifying nightmare from 4 days ago vanished from his mind without a trace. Therefore, he did not find the unjust 3 days particularly painful, and as he left the station now, his mind was brightly cleared and his steps were naturally light. The day of rebirth quietly opening around an unexpected point. It is beautiful too. Muttering this, even finding the mimicry of the detective who had sarcastically hidden his alonal box during the morning interrogation endearing now, he stepped out of the station gate, and the bright autumn afternoon sunlight softly enveloped his entire body, as if by design. Like a child choking up at the warm milk, he felt the warm sunlight throughout his body. His mind, which had contemplated the hell of death under the cold moonlight a few days ago, was now burning with the joy of rebirth under the warm sunlight. He couldn't help but be amazed at this horrifying yet wondrous fluctuation of his own heart. He couldn't help but be amazed at his easily swayed mind, which had decisively wandered between death and life, as vast a difference as moonlight and sunlight, over just a few days. Just as much, whatever his emotions were at the time, he couldn't help but scold his own frivolous theories and thoughts that had so easily decided on suicide. However, anyway, the sunlight of rebirth now enveloped his whole body, and his heart leaped with joy. To Juhwa's eyes, as he left the front of the station and walked down the street, everything on the street now uniformly appeared fresh, dancing with new meaning on the blank paper of his mind. If only I could quickly meet the lamp of my heart, that maiden, with this joyful mind. As he walked the fresh streets under the sunlight, shooting dead the nihilism of a few days ago and violently rousing a new taste for life, the figure of the beautiful maiden arose gracefully in his leaping chest. However, having no way of immediately finding out where the maiden lived, he had no choice but to head for his own lodging for now. Passing through the messy back alley and arriving at his landlord's house, he quietly opened the soot-stained gate and entered, fearing he might run into the landlord to whom he owed rent. The dim room, the messily scattered room. The moment he opened the door, all his affections seemed to plummet. Compared to the bright weather outside, what a gloomy atmosphere this was. Realizing that being shut in such a dark, gloomy atmosphere left one with nothing to think about but death, he understood that the reason he had decisively planned his suicide 4 days ago was truly because the room he lived in was dark and dim. Living in a dark room was because he lacked any stable guarantee of livelihood, and lacking a stable guarantee of livelihood was because he had no steady job, nor did he belong to a wealthy CC. Ultimately, his decisive attempt at suicide was because he belonged to the impoverished class, and on top of that, had no work into which he poured his body and soul. In other words, he realized that he had lost interest in life not because he was saturated with an abundant life, but truly because he was extremely destitute in all material aspects. It was rather bizarre to him that he had only now barely realized this simple logic. Entering the dim room, the shreds of Marx's beard were messily trampled beneath his feet. Bending down, he painstakingly picked up the pieces of Marx's portrait that his own hands had ripped to shreds 4 days ago. His hand, which had trembled in nervous rage 4 days ago, now trembled with apologetic remorse toward his teacher. As he picked up the pieces of the portrait one by one with trembling hands, a single piece of paper among the messy trash suddenly caught his eye. Swiftly picking it up, it was a postcard. Wondering where this sudden letter could have come from, since it had been a long time since he had exchanged correspondence with anyone, he looked closely. There was no sender's name on the front, but on the back, at the end of the main text, thin handwriting characteristic of a woman named Ju Nam-juk caught his eye. A letter from an unknown woman he had never met. With a heart leaping in curiosity, his gaze eagerly swept down the letters of the letter one by one. While reading down, the identity of that unknown woman clearly dawned on him. I was extremely rude upon our first meeting at Jongdong Ridge the other night. Watching from beside the wall as you suffered an unexpected mishap because of me, I couldn't suppress my feelings of apology. I hope you didn't suffer too much after going in. Please come visit me once you get out. I picked up your business card on the street after you left that night and found your address on it, which is why I am dropping these few lines as a token of gratitude. So she was Ju Nam-juk. With a heart too overjoyed, he held the postcard for a long time, greedily reading down character by character again, and calling out Ju Nam-juk several times, many times, he thanked her inwardly. Ju Nam-juk, thank you. With a sudden surge of joy, he sprang up from his seat. I will go find her right this moment. Putting the postcard in his pocket and leaving the torn pieces of the portrait as they were in the messy room, he ran out of the room. Hurrying his steps through the setting sun of the evening streets, climbing Hwadong Road, and weaving through a somewhat complex alley to find the target address, it was an old house with a soot-stained gate. When he opened the gate with a pounding heart, a neat young girl of 15 or 16 came out from the servants' quarters right next to the gate to greet him. Is Ms. Ju Nam-juk here? She is not. Did she go out? She hasn't returned from the factory yet. From the factory? Yes, there's been some turmoil at the factory lately, so my sister returns late like this every day. So that person is your older sister? That is correct. If that was the case, although his memory of the short moment under the moonlight the other night was somehow vague, he could easily discover many similarities between her impression and this girl's features, like the bridge of her nose and her large eyes. Feeling a sudden, strong sense of familiarity toward the girl, he pushed the conversation all the way to their personal circumstances, even though he thought it might be overstepping. Do your parents live in this house with you too? No, our hometown is in the countryside, but just the two of us siblings came up and rented this room to live. Saying this, the girl hesitantly pointed to the servants' quarters. Finding her demeanor very cute, Jua asked about the girl's situation with a smile. So, do you go to school? The girl bowed her head shyly. I'm not attendee, ning anywhere yet. Then are you just playing? I was expelled from the country school over a student strike incident, so I felt awkward just playing at home, which is why I followed my sister up here. It wasn't particularly with school as my goal. So you're a young fighter. Seeing the firm lines promising a future fighter flowing within the cute features of the girl, who bowed her head again in embarrassment, felt welcome and reliable to him. Through a few exchanges with the girl, Jua roughly guessed the background and character of the two sisters, and the more he learned about the maiden's situation and direction, the more his attachment and hope toward her grew. However, standing at the gate for a long time having a lengthy conversation with the young girl while the maiden was absent didn't seem proper, so he took out a business card, gave it to the girl, and made a request. When your sister returns, please give her this and tell her I came to visit. As soon as he finished speaking, the gate creaked open behind his back, and a simple color scheme lightly flowed in. You're finally here, Unni. Even without hearing the girl's voice welcoming her gladly, there was no way Juwa wouldn't instantly recognize that simple color scheme, white on the upper half and black on the lower, as the very same one he had met at Jongdong Ridge the other night. His heart shone hazily again, and he couldn't suppress a slight flutter. A guest has come to visit. Before the young girl even announced it, the maiden had already recognized Juwa. "It's Mr. Juwa." To the maiden greeting him gladly, Juwa also bowed his head and returned the greeting gladly. "I received the letter you sent with gratitude." In the meantime, the gate opened again, and an adult who looked well over 30, who seemed to have come with the maiden and stood outside the gate, came in. "Please, come into the room." Taking a step into the room first, the two sisters invited Johua in. "Mr. So, please come in too." Responding to the maiden's invitation, the middle-aged man entered the room without hesitation, and finding it difficult to refuse repeated invitations, Johua also finally entered the room. Receiving two guests made the narrow room cramped. However, Juwa did not feel cramped at all. Rather, he felt a sense of spaciousness and comfort. Offering seats to the two guests, the maiden lightly sat down later, tossing equal smiles at the two men, before finally looking at Mr. Seo and opening her mouth. "This is the very person I mentioned the other day." Suddenly introduced, Juwa didn't know what to do and hurriedly bowed his head. "Ha, is that so? I apologize for meeting you so suddenly in this setting." Replying modestly, Mr. Seo introduced his name and said, "You went through a lot of trouble the other day, didn't you?" He asked for his hand and gave it a firm shake. Juwa couldn't help but feel deeply grateful for this unexpected, firm handshake from the modest Mr. So. At the same time, he felt a solemn sensation, as if he had already taken one step into the solemn territory of Mr. Seo and the others. "How much did you suffer?" With a smile, the maiden consoled him for his few days of detention. However, feeling quite sheepish about responding to this beautiful and admirable maiden's excessive praise for just 3 days of hardship, Juwa couldn't find the right answer. About 10 minutes after the conversation had blended together, Mr. So looked at his watch, changed his tone, and spoke to the maiden. "Well then, let's get going now." "Yes," the maiden answered and apologetically asked for Juwa's understanding. "Because things blew up at the factory lately. I'm very busy managing the fellow workers. I'm sorry you came all this way, but please come again. I will also visit you soon." Mr. So's request followed. "I hope we have frequent opportunities to meet in the future." Feeling that the maiden's apology and Mr. Seo's request were more than he deserved, Juwa again couldn't find the right answer. Leaving the house, bidding farewell to Mr. Seo and the maiden in the back alley, and walking down the street alone, the figure of the beautiful maiden began to shine even brighter in Juwa's heart, and her actions, along with the impression of Mr. Seo, whom he had met for the first time, firmly attached themselves to his mind. It welled up and welled up consecutively like a hot spring. Pooling up fully, it streamed down both cheeks. He couldn't help but wonder how there could be so much clear water pooled in some corner of a human body where red blood was supposed to be, yet it flowed down endlessly. Before long, both sides of the pillow he was lying on became damp. Before his blurred vision, the figure of his hometown floated up hazily. The figures of his aging parents and his young sisters passed by in turns. Before Juwa's tear-blurred sight, their concrete figures eventually transformed into the abstract figures of aging parents and young sisters of the impoverished class in general, before turning back into the concrete figures of Juwa's own parents and sisters. Because it was not an aggressive attitude glaring and reproaching him, but the pitiful figure of them, beaten down by poverty and weakness, looking resentfully at Juwa, their sole trusted son and only brother, it became an even more powerful attack, their powerless arrows piercing Juwa's heart even deeper. Just as he was about to tear at his frustrated chest, a phrase from the letter from his father in his hometown, crumpled in his right hand, caught his eye again. "It seems the day when starvation will strike is not many days away now. Now you must guess, too, that there is no other way but to hold the little one's hands every day and cry outside the fence." A record of a simple fact essentially became a heavy iron club of appeal, seeming to strike down on his entire body. "You are not the only one in the world with poor parents." Despite this warning he had always heard, placed in this miserable situation, he couldn't help but feel as if he was the only one with poor parents. In truth, it painfully dawned on him just how much his household, which had begun its steps of decline several years ago, must have tilted during the many years he hadn't been able to return. But what on earth should he do? Thinking about how he could possibly save his pitiful family only made his vision go dark. From his darkened eyes, tears still welled up and flowed. Through the flowing tears, the figures of his family members faintly floated up one by one again. He felt an impulse to call out the names of his ragged sisters one by one. It had been a long time, although worries and desperate concerns about his family hadn't been absent from his subconscious, even when he planned his suicide a few days ago. But receiving a letter from his father out of the blue caused his renewed worries for his family to sharply squeeze out his dry tears. Had the faint sound knocking on his quiet room door not brushed past his ears suddenly, his tears, flowing all day long, might have never known when to stop. Springing up, wiping his tears, and opening the door, he was first startled by the unexpected guest. "This is truly unexpected. I had a reason to drop by suddenly." Entering with a cheerful smile, Jua felt so ashamed to face the guest's bright expression with his own messy expression, having lain there shedding gloomy tears until now, that he hesitated even to lift his face directly. "It is very messy." Since the room was messy and his appearance was messy too, he turned his face away while making this excuse. However, the guest seemed to have swiftly caught his expression. "This is no time to spend being too gloomy." It was somewhat excessive advice, but because it was excessive, it felt even more intimate and sounded thankful to Jua. This was only the third time Jua had met her, yet perhaps observing some aspect of him, tossing such reassuring words, coupled with her actions from the other day, sounded indescribably thankful to Jua. In times like these, who wouldn't have pitiful personal circumstances? The intimate guest, Ju Nam-juk, comforted him with an even more intimate tone, as if she had even guessed the contents of his agonizing circumstances, and continued. "Whether due to a personal hardship, family circumstances, or other various burdens, there wouldn't be anyone without agony. But one must take a step forward, shake off that agony, and to him it was nothing more than enlightening rhetoric, but because it was Namjuk's intimate advice, it did not sound dismissive to Jua. Rather, he felt grateful for it. My family's circumstances are just so pitiful. That is why you must gather more courage and step forward. I have already made up my mind, but I can't help feeling gloomy from time to time. You must overcome it with firm conviction." Jua secretly rejoiced inwardly at her meaningful words while also feeling grateful. "Your mind is gloomy probably because you have no work." "That might be true." "Then please take on some work. Actually, the reason I came by so suddenly today is because I have an intimate favor to ask." "What kind of favor? Will you listen to it?" Looking deeply into Juwa's complexion with a heavy gaze, she carefully began to untie the cloth bundle she had brought. Could it be nearly 500 sheets? A neat bundle of half-paper-sized sheets emerged. She lifted it and placed it in front of Jua. "I need you to take care of this." A fresh scent of dark ink flowed from the narrow surface of the paper. The arrangement of large and small type and the meaning they brought struck his vision. In that moment, he felt a tingling sensation as if he had drunk peppermint. His gaze, always accustomed to distorted letters and obliterated phrases, could not help but be brilliantly moved upon facing free, fresh, and complete letters for the first time like this. In fact, a freshness of peppermint flowed from every single noun, verb, and adjective. "It's of a similar nature to the one from the other day." "You mean from that night?" He only asked with his mouth. Juwa's gaze did not leave the paper. His gaze, burning with emotion, greedily swept down the lines one by one. "We are short-handed, so I had no choice but to come ask for your help, Mr. Jua. Thank you." Before he could even give thanks, since it was his first time facing such a task, Jua felt his chest tighten. However, being trusted by them to this extent felt terribly joyful and thankful to him. It might have partly been because they themselves keenly observed Juhua and found reliable traits, but from meeting him for the first time at Jongdong Ridge the other day, to treating him intimately with Mr. So when visiting him later, and now personally coming to entrust him with such an important task. Being trusted to this extent was unspeakably thankful to Juhwa. In that thankful heart, kicking away the worries and anxiety about the heavy duty, a bold emotion surged up in Juhwa's chest. However, what gave his mind a resolute decision was not merely this bold emotion, but the heavy whip of conscience hidden deep in his heart. Nevertheless, he joyfully accepted this first responsibility that had come to him. I will take it on. At his reliable acceptance, Namjook threw a heavy smile and expressed her gratitude. Her large, bold eyes, the two eyes that had left a deep impression on him since Jeongdong Ridge, took on a rich luster and looked steadily at Juhwa. Completely forgetting his earlier sorrow and tears, Juhwa's two eyes also shone with emotion, tracing the same straight line as his comrade's gaze. Please be sure to take care of it tonight. I will. Waiting for the night to deepen, Juhwa finally carried out the task. He felt an unpredicted passion surging up. His assigned area was wide, and the moonlight was overly bright. Finding his own shadow drawn by the moonlight bothersome, he stuck close to the sides of buildings and ran along the long streets. The weather was chilly, but since it was his first experience, his chest and hands trembled slightly. However, running through the long streets, carefully pasting and laying out the sheets page by page, cold sweat flowed ceaselessly down his whole body. His mind and hands were so busy that he didn't even have the luxury to occasionally look back and check the traces of his work. It was probably well past midnight when he finished all the work. When he ran briskly through the quietly sleeping streets and returned home, a long sigh of relief finally escaped him. The next afternoon, Juhwa sought out Namjook at her house, guessing the time her factory shift would end. Partly to report the beautifully self-comforting results of his mission from the night before, and partly to hear whatever other news there might be. However, even though the time she should have left the factory had long passed, Namjook's figure was nowhere to be seen, and only her younger sister greeted him, just like the other day. Unlike the other day, there was no sign of joy in the sister's figure. Instead, Juhwa found it strange that a gloomy expression entirely covered her face. A gloomy expression as if she had been crying alone in the room. No, Juhwa discovered that traces of tears were clearly pooled on her two cheeks. Why were you crying? She was dragged away. Huh. They swarmed in at dawn and dragged Unni away. Juhwa's heart sank heavily. A belated sigh of, "Ah!" escaped his lips. The younger sister continued in an angry tone. I was dragged away with her too, and after being tossed around all day, I just barely got out on my way back now. Who knows when Unni will get out? What is this about? It seems to be about the incident at the East Gate last night. Ho, he had somewhat guessed as much, but facing such a mishap made Juhwa's heart drop and his emotions churn. When we went in at dawn, Mr. So had already arrived at some point too. Ho, it seems the matter is quite serious. Juhwa's anxiety deepened. Did you not suffer too much? They just did a simple interrogation and let me go. For me, it was just one day, so you can't even call it suffering, but I think Unni and the others might suffer quite a bit. Don't worry too much. However, even as he comforted her like this, Juhwa himself was very worried about their safety. The girl, who had been blankly lost in her gloomy expression, suddenly gathered her wits and looked at Juhwa. Oh right, please go quickly. Yes? Don't stand here for long, go back home quickly. Why is that? This place is a danger zone, the girl explained in an urgent tone. They'll probably search this area thoroughly and surveil our house for the next few days. Even when I left the station earlier, they made a ridiculous request to write down the names of everyone who comes to our house today one by one. Later on, they'll probably set up a stakeout surveillance network on our house. So it's very dangerous. It's better if you leave this place quickly. Juhwa clearly understood the girl's warning. Realizing the danger imminent upon his own safety, his whole body tensed up. I will go. When Unni gets out, I will tell her, so I think it would be advantageous for you not to visit until then. Understood. Thank you. Praying for the girl's safety, Juhwa left the place. Worried that someone might suddenly pop out from a corner of the alley and grab him, he slipped through the alleys with fast steps, and when he came out onto Wadong Street, he recovered a slightly composed consciousness. Due to the danger to his own safety and his worries for Namjoon and the others, his mind had been chaotic, but now thoughts about his actions from the previous night slowly unraveled. Regarding his minor actions last night, he naturally did not feel any heroic pride, but he couldn't help but feel a kind of joy and pleasure regarding his first mission, executed without a trace. Even if he hadn't participated in the central pivot of a grand spirit, thinking that his actions would serve as the function of one small screw in that complex operation, he couldn't suppress a unified sense of satisfaction. And while feeling grateful for Namjoon's trust in him, he also couldn't help but feel as if he had already completely stepped into their solemn territory. With his shallow experience and short history, that feeling might certainly be excessive self-conceit. However, he couldn't deny the fact that he had at least grasped the rope to step into that territory, and that he was making an effort at it. He couldn't deny the current process of entering a solemn world by tracing a rope formed by a woman. When he first met the maiden, the meaning of the maiden reflected in his heart was different from just seeing her as a single worker, and while it was true that even now, such a meaning flowed in one aspect of the impression and character of the maiden reflected in his feelings, Juhua reaching his current process was not solely directed by such a meaning. Behind it stood the stern command and guidance of his own awakened conscience. In other words, the maiden had poured oil on the fire of his conscience. Here, Juhua thought his prelude was situated, and the departure of his life had begun. A prelude must have various tunes. He thought that a case like his was certainly one style of tune among those various tunes. Even so, how great a change and difference was there between his current state of mind and his state of mind a few days ago when he was planning his suicide. When considering that heaven and earth change, he had to acknowledge the maiden's great merit and deeply realize his attachment and gratitude toward her. Walking down Hwadong Street and stepping out onto the wide road, worries about Namjoon frosted over Juhwa's mind, while at the same time he realized that the rugged path of hardship and danger to come was winding out before him. The whole western sky at sunset was soaked in red blood spat out by an unseasonable glow. In the red blood, the heavy sun, regretting its downfall, was hesitating its final moment. The sight of the sun, covered in blood, yet grumbling and struggling against its clearly determined final fate, appeared hideous to Juhwa's eyes. Tomorrow's dawn will shine brilliantly. Tomorrow's dawn will shine brilliantly. Just as the young man found his guiding light and the courage to face a new day, I hope this quiet tale has brought a sense of peace to your own heart. Even in our darkest and coldest nights, there is always a dawn waiting just over the horizon, ready to greet us with its warmth. You have done well today. Now it is time to rest completely. May your dreams be gentle, and may you wake to a beautiful tomorrow. Good night, and sleep well.